Anyway, let's go to the Chargers. They kick things off with running back Omarion Hampton. They go wide receiver Trey Harris from Ole Miss with their second pick. Jamaree Caldwell, the defensive tackle out of Oregon, was their third-round pick. Kyle Kennard in the fourth, the edge rusher out of South Carolina. They had 2 5s, Keandre Lambert-Smith from Auburn and Oronde Gadsden the second, tight end / receiver out of Syracuse. And then Branson Taylor, developmental tackle / guard for Pittsburgh. R.J. Mickens in the sixth, Clemson safety. And Traqueezy Bridges, safety out of Florida, in the seventh. So they kicked it off with Omarion Hampton. I was not expecting this. This is a Ravens transplant front office going running back in the first round. What were your thoughts on Hampton in the first year for the Chargers?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it once they signed Najee Harris. I think a lot of people had Omarion Hampton as the pick for the Chargers before they signed Najee Harris in free agency. And once they made that move, it's like, well, actually, they've got Harris in now. They haven't invested in the running back position. Last year, really, they've just gotten cast-offs, and maybe actually their approach is going to be non-investment in the running back position and sort of the edge that way, right? Like, let's actually do it as cheaply as humanly possible and rely on the fact that everything else is good. But no, they then end up going with Omarion Hampton in the first round. And similar conversation with the Raiders, right? Would you say yes in this flowchart world? To me, I would get a yes from the Chargers in terms of I think they have a run game already, right? They don't necessarily need the running game to create it out of nothing. But I would get a no the next question. Like, are you comfortable with the opportunity cost at this point? What am I leaving on the table to draft this running back? And I think where they were, that combination of what I'm leaving on the table, in addition to how much better is Omarion Hampton versus the rest of the running back class, that's where I get the no for this one. I don't think I would have taken Omarion Hampton in the first round. I think he is running back 2 in this draft class, but I think the gap between him and the rest of the pack is so much tighter than it is between Ashton Genty and running back 2 in this draft class. So to me, even though they're drafting him, much lower down than number 6 overall with the Raiders, I just think it's a much harder sell to say he's worth taking at this spot in the first round when you could have come back, in the second, the third, the fourth round, wherever, and drafted a running back who might not be that much worse.
Now, I think the thing that makes it potentially work, kind of like where they went with the rest of their picks. Look, I think the Chargers, for a good team, had some very specific needs. I think they need a future starting edge rusher with Khalil Mack on a 1-year deal. They need defensive tackle help. They need wide receiver help. I think they at least attacked those positions later. Just to talk about Hampton as a player, the one thing I was curious about is he felt like a better zone runner than a gap runner. He felt like a guy that's just really smooth, ride the wave, one cut, get upfield, and then he's explosive, has some unbelievable contact balance plays in there. You and I both questioned his vision a little bit. For me, it was vision in gap scheme, which the Chargers, Greg Roman, like to run a little bit more than everyone else. So that's the other part about the fit that I like. When people are saying, hey, Hampton's going to go to the Chargers at 22, I'm like, I get it. I have him as RB2 as well. I don't know if that's the team or the fit, but they went that way. So we know Harbaugh wants to run the ball. I think Najee Harris will also see the ball enough. And they'll look at it as a 1-2 punch where Hampton is more explosive and more of a big play threat than Najee. And, they'll be pounding the rock the way they want to, especially after they improved their offensive line last year. So we'll see how that works. But I at least like the fact that they got Trey Harris. The second year they go second round wide receiver, his fit now. I mean, what a mix of receivers that they have. We'll talk about that in a second. But Trey Harris, I think, has some verticality to his game to complement Ladd McConkey. And then Jamaree Caldwell at defensive tackle in the third. This has been like a 10-year issue for the Chargers, I think, toughening up on the interior of the defensive line outside of having Poona Ford for a year or whatever it was. I think Caldwell could do some damage as a run defender up front. And Kyle Kennard was outstanding in the SEC last year. The concerns there being kind of explosiveness off the edge. He's kind of a length winner and one year wonder. But they've got some players that can at least contribute in rounds 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah, no, they have. Absolutely. The big thing in this draft for me is what Trey Harris becomes. He's one of the most fascinating receivers in this draft class because he's got some similarities to Dante Thornton in terms of the offense he's coming out of. Ole Miss isn't quite as bad as Tennessee's, but it's certainly on the spectrum of this is very, very awkward to project to the NFL level. So Trey Harris has got some absolutely ridiculous numbers, like yards per route run figures that are right up there with the best receivers or the most dominant receivers to come out of college in years and have come into the NFL and taken the league by storm. But that type of offense also inflates those numbers. Like there are some, so the list of guys that are like sky high in that yards per route run figure, it's like NFL superstars and then people like Kearis Garrett, right, who came out of like a Tulsa offense and barely made the NFL for more than 2 minutes. It's like a 50-50 mix of superstars and then dudes that were just pumped up by that offense. So that's part of the problem we're dealing with here. But I really did like Trey Harris's tape. I think he has the potential to be something really impressive. And when you're sort of projecting from that offense, you're dealing in incredibly small sample sizes, but you're looking for like, show me an NFL route and then show me you know how to run that NFL route. And he does have some of that on his tape. He's got, you know, some routine like in or out breaking digs or out routes. And he shows impressive route running ability and head fakes that work, like head fakes that actually sell the cornerback and get him moving in a different direction. And then, you know, he's got all the usual stuff in terms of the size and the go-to ability. When Ole Miss needed a play, they were throwing it in his direction. So it's a gamble in terms of that offense to the NFL. Is just an inherent gamble, and there's no real way around that. But I do think that his upside is extremely high, in particular in this draft where, you know, for the last couple of years, we haven't had a ton of these guys that can be a true X wide receiver. I think Harris has that potential and that range of outcomes. So for that reason alone, you know, I think you have to say, look, the upside for this guy is that of a first rounder. It's just that the risk is that of a second rounder.
Hey guys, just taking a quick break to tell you, hey, just over 50% of you are still unsubscribed to Check the Mic. It helps the channel. It helps to make sure that you don't miss any of our shows. So if you have a chance, hit the subscribe button right now. So now you add him to this receiving core where Ladd McConkey is the star, was outstanding as a rookie. Quentin Johnston was a first rounder a couple of years ago. The more bodies you could put ahead of him on the depth chart, I think the better. And if you can limit Johnston's targets, but every now and again, what do we have that 11 catch game in week 17 or week 18 last year or whatever it was, limit Quentin Johnston's targets, but maybe just go specifically with what he does well, right? And he's got some big playability. So if he's wide receiver 3/4, you still have Mike Williams in there for a year if he's got anything left. And then they add Keandre Lambert-Smith later. He felt like a bigger body. He's about 6 foot, 185. Felt big. I thought at times at Auburn. Played big. You know, great one-handed catch against Arkansas. Vertical threat though. Sub 4.4 40. So another speed receiver to compete with. You know, as like a wide receiver 4 down the field threat, which I think most good offenses have that guy, and Lambert-Smith can compete for that role. So I thought they did a nice job there as far as adding a couple bodies to the wide receiver room. Jamaree Caldwell in the third, I think, is pretty good value to add to the defensive line. So much like what Denver did, you're in a deep defensive line class. You're adding those players in the middle of the draft in round 3 and round 4. And I think Kyle Kennard and Jamaree Caldwell have a chance to immediately be a part of that rotation and have an impact. So I think the first 4, say 5 picks all have a path to the field here and to make an impact.
Yeah, and they've really targeted that kind of upgrading the skill positions thing. I mean, that, again, people kind of thought that for a while. It was either going to be a wide receiver or a tight end, and they end up going with the running back Omarion Hampton, but then circling back for a wide receiver with first-round upside in Trey Harris. So, again, another team that's starting to put together a pretty fascinating group of skill position players to put around Justin Herbert and this offense, which, you know, wants to be reliant on the players that aren't the quarterback. I mean, that's the way Jim Harbaugh likes to play football, right? He doesn't want the quarterback dropping back 45, 50, 60 times a game and putting the whole thing on their shoulders. He wants the quarterback to be a facilitator and just get the ball to the running back, to your talented receivers, to your tight end, whatever it is. And they've added a couple of those guys.
The other room to discuss here, Sam, they had Oronde Gadsden the second. So he was a wide receiver conversion to tight end at Syracuse. Bulked up to, what did he get to? 243, 6'5", 243. He was kind of, I think he was playing at like 220 a couple years ago for Syracuse. Still don't know if he could really block, but he tries. But he runs 4.65. I think he's got pretty good ball skills. So you add him to the tight end room to go with Will Dissly and Tyler Conklin and your IPP guy. So now you've got this developmental tight end room if they hit on one of those guys, I think Gadsden in the 5th has some pretty good potential there as well. So that's what I think rounds out this draft nicely with the Chargers. And even though like we used to feel obligated to, crush the first round running back thing, again, I think Hampton's going to be a good player. I think he's going to be good. And I think if a couple of these guys hit beyond that, Chargers are going to feel good about their draft. The consensus didn't love it. They had him just ahead of the Broncos at number 23 in the GPA, and Thor had an F. This is one of his 2 Fs here.
Yeah, it's not a draft pick, so we can't give them credit for it. But yeah, they signed Jordan Pataya from the IPP. He was one of the guys who's old enough that he wasn't draft eligible, so he was essentially a free agent right off the bat. Pataya is an interesting player because he's right up there with the best the best sort of pedigree rugby players to have attempted this switch that have ever done it. Right, he was as good a player really as has tried to make that switch, and is a kind of big body, but not. Like he's listed as a tight end, which is a sort of nominal designation at the moment, but he's like 6'3", 6'4", 235, something like that, which is, not quite tight end size, but also a little bit bigger than your standard wide receiver. And I'm not sure he has either of those skill sets exactly. He's going to be one of those sort of movable chess piece, H-back type players. And now, that's kind of what Gadsden is as well. Suddenly they're assembling like a bunch of interesting like receiving weapons as well.
I use big body for him, not like he's Gronk, but he's long, right? He's got this big catch radius and everything. So yeah, I mean that there's a world where Gadsden becomes a favorite target of Justin Herbert. So they're throwing a whole lot of different body types and a lot of fast players into this receiving core. Or I don't know if Trey Harris is necessarily fast, but he plays fast, right? He plays with some good verticality to his game. So fascinating.
By the way,
group here for the Chargers.
I got to see some of the kind of workout film of the IPP guys from their pro days and stuff. Pataya's movement was a hell of a lot more explosive than I was expecting him to look. Like he was one of the guys. A lot of them kind of looked. Once you saw them running football related things, it's like okay, it's normal, right? Whereas Pataya literally jumped out as like, okay, that guy looks legit as an NFL athlete. It's explosive rather than just he's a good, decent athlete. Like Louis Rees-Zammit the year before, he's always had a slightly janky running style, so it's hard to, but he didn't look like dynamically explosive the way Pataya did. So fun player for them to have added.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.